It started as a simple press conference until one reporter crossed the line. What happened next? Nobody expected, not the audience, not the cameras, and definitely not the reporter. Trump's reaction? Unfiltered, unscripted, and unlike anything you've seen before. You think you know how this ends, but trust me, you don't. The air inside the press briefing room felt electric that afternoon. Rows of chairs were packed tightly together, filled with journalists from every corner of the country. The hum of whispered conversations floated in the air like static, mixed with the soft click-click of cameras adjusting their focus. On the podium, the presidential seal shone under bright stage lights, a reminder of the weight of the moment. This was no ordinary press conference. Rumors had already been circulating all week that tough, uncomfortable questions were coming. Donald Trump stepped up to the microphone with his usual energy, chin up, eyes sweeping across the room. He adjusted the mic, gave a quick smile to the crowd, and began answering the first few questions with confidence. His tone was brisk, his answers sharp, as if he was ready for a verbal boxing match. But in the middle row, a young reporter was sitting perfectly still, waiting. She wasn't flipping through her notes like the others. She wasn't raising her hand too early. She was watching him closely, studying his rhythm, waiting for the right opening. She had prepared for this moment for days, maybe even weeks. She had rehearsed the words in her head over and over, knowing that if she got her chance, she had to deliver the question clearly and without hesitation. Finally, Trump pointed toward her. "Yes, you go ahead." She stood up slowly, her press badge swinging gently from her neck. The chatter in the room faded into silence. Every camera turned toward her, every pen poised above a notebook. She locked eyes with him, not in a confrontational way, but with a steady, unshakable focus. "Mr. Trump," she began, her voice firm but controlled, "do you believe your actions have ever put the American people in danger?" The words dropped into the room like a stone into still water. There was no polite preamble, no soft lead-in, just a direct, high-voltage question. A ripple of shock moved through the crowd. Several reporters looked at each other, eyebrows raised. It wasn't that the thought had never crossed anyone's mind. It had, but very few dared to frame it so bluntly, especially with Trump standing just a few feet away. Every microphone on the media table seemed to angle itself toward the podium. Cameramen instinctively zoomed in. This wasn't going to be a routine soundbite. They could feel it. For just a split second, Trump froze. His lips stopped mid-word. His hand halted mid-gesture. His eyes narrowed ever so slightly, but not in anger, more like he was calculating his next move. It was a rare stillness. Usually, he would fire back instantly with a counter-question, a deflection, or even a sharp remark to put the reporter on the defensive. But this time, the pause stretched out just long enough for the room to feel the weight of the question. In the back row, someone coughed nervously. A photographer lowered his camera, almost afraid to click the shutter and break the tension. The young reporter didn't flinch. She didn't fidget with her notes or glance down at her recorder. She stood tall, eyes fixed on him, waiting for his answer. And then came the look. It was subtle, a mix of surprise, calculation, and maybe even a flicker of respect. Millions would later pause the viral video at that exact frame, trying to read his expression like a poker hand. Was he irritated? Was he impressed? Was he caught off guard? He leaned back slightly in his chair, the corners of his mouth curling just a little. Not quite a smile, not quite a smirk. His hands rested on the podium as he looked down for a second, as if weighing how much he wanted to say. The pause was short, but in the world of live television, it felt long enough to hold an audience hostage. You could sense that something different was about to happen. And it wasn't just the people in the room who noticed. Later, those watching from home would describe that silence as the longest 5 seconds of the entire press conference. Some even swore they could see him thinking, a rare glimpse into the man behind the speeches. Then, with a slow inhale, he leaned into the microphone. Cameras clicked furiously as his voice broke the silence. "You know," he said, his tone lower and slower than before, "that's actually a fair question." Gasps, small but audible, moved through the crowd. This was not the expected counterpunch. No mocking nickname, no sidestep into another topic. Just acknowledgement. People in the room shifted in their seats. Some looked surprised, others suspicious. A few reporters quickly scribbled the words in their notepads, knowing they had just captured a moment that would make headlines. Whatever came next, it was clear. The atmosphere in the press room had completely changed. In that instant, a single bold question had turned a standard press conference into a moment the world wouldn't forget. And for the young reporter, it was the beginning of something far bigger than she could have imagined. She wasn't a familiar face on national television. Her name didn't scroll across the bottom of major news broadcasts, and she didn't have millions of followers hanging on her every word. But inside the circles of the press corps, she carried a different kind of reputation, one built not on fame, but on fearlessness. While many reporters built their careers by treading carefully, asking safe, predictable questions that wouldn't ruffle feathers, she was different. She was known for asking the questions that made politicians shift in their seats, the ones that didn't fit neatly into press conference etiquette. Some colleagues admired her for it. Others thought she was reckless. But one thing was certain. When she raised her hand, people paid attention. Before walking into the press briefing room that day, she had already made up her mind. She had one shot, and she wasn't going to waste it. As she set up her notepad and tested her recorder, she leaned toward her cameraman and whispered something that would later feel prophetic. "If I get my chance, I'm going to ask what everyone is thinking, but no one will say." The cameraman raised an eyebrow. He'd worked with her long enough to know she wasn't exaggerating. "You sure about this?" he asked quietly. She gave a small smile. "I didn't come here to make friends." On the table in front of her sat the printed list of approved questions, a routine feature in high-profile press events. It was an unspoken truth that certain reporters would be called on, and their questions would be safe enough to keep the event moving without drama. But her question wasn't on that list. Not even close. She had written it in big, bold letters across her notebook earlier that morning. Every word had been chosen carefully, not to provoke for the sake of provocation, but to cut straight to the heart of what she and countless Americans wanted to know. Still, she was well aware of the risks. In the world of political journalism, access is everything. Lose your press credentials, and you lose the chance to challenge those in power face-to-face. There were reporters who had been blacklisted for far less than what she was about to do. But that didn't scare her. In her mind, journalism wasn't about staying comfortable. It was about making the powerful uncomfortable. And if that meant this could be her last day in the briefing room, so be it. She sat in her chair, shoulders squared, listening as the press conference began. The first few questions were exactly what she expected. Predictable, easy to answer, nothing that could make headlines beyond the evening news cycle. She glanced at Trump as he answered each one with his signature confidence, sometimes leaning into jokes, sometimes brushing off criticism with a wave of his hand. He was in control, steering the conversation exactly where he wanted it to go. Her fingers tapped lightly against her pen. She didn't want to interrupt the flow too early. She needed the right moment. The room was like a dance. One reporter would ask, the president would answer, and another would jump in. But she stayed quiet, waiting for his eyes to scan in her direction. The cameraman beside her shifted his lens ever so slightly, already anticipating that something unusual was about to happen. He'd filmed hundreds of press events before, but there was something in her stillness that told him this would be different. When Trump finally pointed toward her section, she rose to her feet in one smooth motion. She didn't shuffle papers or clear her throat. She didn't smile to soften the blow. Her voice was clear and unwavering. "Mr. Trump, do you believe your actions have ever put the American people in danger?" The words sliced through the air, cutting the casual rhythm of the room like glass breaking on tile. It was a question designed to demand a real answer, not a polished talking point. And in that moment, she knew there was no taking it back. Her colleagues glanced sideways at her, some with wide eyes, others with faint smirks as if to say, well, she actually did it. A few scribbled furiously in their notepads, already sensing that this exchange would dominate headlines. But she didn't care about their reactions. She cared about his. For a split second, she thought she saw something, hesitation, maybe even surprise, in his expression. She caught him off guard, and that was exactly what she had set out to do. Whether his answer would change anything, she didn't know. But as far as she was concerned, this was what journalism was meant to be, holding the most powerful person in the country accountable, even if it meant risking her own career. And as the cameras rolled, she stood her ground, waiting for the president's reply, fully prepared for whatever storm might follow. Trump leaned back in his chair, a subtle motion, but one that instantly caught the attention of the room. His eyes narrowed ever so slightly, scanning the crowd like a chess player assessing the board after an unexpected move from an opponent. And then it appeared, the expression people knew so well from years of press conferences and rallies, his famous half-smile. It wasn't the warm kind of smile you'd see in family photographs. No, this was the smile of a man who had been challenged and was deciding exactly how to respond. The room collectively braced for the familiar counterattack. This was his usual move, a sharp remark to disarm the reporter, a witty jab to get laughter from the room, or a complete pivot that left the question behind entirely. Everyone had seen it before, and most expected it now. But it didn't come. Instead, he paused. It wasn't a dramatic, overly long silence, just a handful of seconds. But in a press room wired with anticipation, those seconds stretched endlessly. Reporters exchanged quick glances, the kind that silently asked, "Did that just happen?" A few leaned forward, sensing something unusual. The constant clicking of camera shutters slowed, as if even photographers were waiting to see what would happen next before daring to move. This wasn't the Trump they had come to expect. There was no immediate retort, no instant dismissal of the question, no cutting sarcasm. For the first time in a long while, it seemed like he was thinking. That alone was enough to make the moment stand out. The young reporter who had asked the question stood perfectly still, holding her ground. Her eyes didn't dart away, her hands didn't fidget. She simply waited, refusing to break the tension. In the back row, a seasoned White House correspondent whispered under his breath, "Something's different." His colleague nodded slightly, already imagining how this moment would play out on television later. The pause was a gamble. In politics, silence can be dangerous. It can be read as uncertainty, hesitation, or even weakness. But it can also be powerful, a way to control the room, to make every ear lean closer. And in that moment, it was both. For viewers who would later watch the clip on their phones or televisions, the pause became the hook. People replayed it over and over, zooming in on his face, debating what was going through his mind. Some said they saw calculation, others claimed it was vulnerability, and a few even argued it was a rare flash of honesty. Inside the room, the air was thick with curiosity. You could almost feel the collective heartbeat of dozens of journalists waiting for the first word to break the silence. Finally, Trump shifted his posture slightly, leaning forward. His elbows rested gently on the podium, his hands clasping the sides, as though anchoring himself to the moment. His gaze didn't wander. He kept his eyes locked on the reporter. It was clear that whatever came next would be important, not because of the words alone, but because of the context. This was the president confronted directly, in real time, with a question designed to test his accountability. The pause had already ensured the moment would live beyond that room. Clips of the press conference would soon be circulating online with captions like, "Trump stunned by reporter's question. The 5-second silence everyone's talking about. You'll never guess what happened after this pause." And while no one yet knew exactly what he would say, those few seconds had already made history in their own quiet way. For the seasoned political reporters in the room, it was a reminder that even the most predictable figures can surprise you. For the younger journalists, it was proof that bold questions still had the power to shift the energy in a room. As Trump drew in a slow breath, his half-smile softened just enough to blur the line between amusement and contemplation. He adjusted the microphone slightly, the faint static from the speakers breaking the silence like the first crack of ice on a frozen lake. Every lens, every microphone, every eye was locked on him. And somewhere in the back, the young reporter's cameraman tightened his grip on the camera, silently thrilled, because he knew he was capturing something that would be replayed millions of times in the hours to come. The pause was over. Whatever came next would either defuse the moment or ignite it completely. And as he finally leaned closer to the mic, the world waited. Then Trump leaned forward toward the microphone. His movement was slow, deliberate, the kind that made every eye in the room lock onto him. The half-smile was still there, but it had changed, less like a smirk, more like the kind of expression someone wears when they're about to drop something important. You know, he began, his tone suddenly softer, almost conversational. That's actually a fair question. The words hung in the air like smoke. It was so unlike his usual approach that for a moment, no one reacted. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, the squeak of a chair and the shuffle of papers echoing in the silence. The clicking of camera shutters slowed, as if even the photographers were caught off guard. This was not the fiery counterattack anyone had expected. No sharp nicknames, no mocking tone, no quick deflection, just acknowledgement. And in that acknowledgement was something subtle, something rare. It wasn't an admission of guilt, but it was an admission of consideration, an understanding that the question was worth asking. I've made decisions, he continued, his voice steady but lower than before, that people agree with and decisions they don't. But everything I've done, he paused just long enough for the weight of his words to settle, I believe has been in the best interest of the country. His eyes swept the room as he spoke, not darting around nervously, but deliberately making contact with several reporters. It was as if he wanted each one to hear him directly. You may not like my methods, he added, his tone tightening slightly, but my intentions? Always for America. A few reporters scribbled frantically, sensing they had just captured the kind of quote that editors dream about. Others simply stared, processing what they had just heard. It wasn't that the content of his answer was completely shocking. Politicians often defend their actions as being for the greater good. But it was the delivery, the lack of combativeness, that made it remarkable. For years, his relationship with the press had been a constant battlefield. Exchanges were fast, sharp, and often brutal. But in this moment, he had stepped off the battlefield entirely and taken a different route, one that almost felt presidential in the traditional sense. The young reporter who had asked the question remained still, her expression unreadable. Inside, she felt a mixture of surprise and curiosity. She had expected deflection or attack, maybe even an attempt to dodge her entirely. She hadn't expected this. Around the room, some journalists shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure how to react. They were prepared to write stories about confrontation, about tension, about a president clashing with the press. But what they had instead was something more complex, something that would make headlines for a completely different reason. In the control room of one major network, producers were already marking the timestamp. "Cut that clip," one of them ordered. "We're leading with it." They knew a moment like this would spread far beyond the political sphere. It was the kind of exchange that would dominate Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube by nightfall. Trump's eyes lingered on the reporter for a second longer before he leaned back in his chair again. The half-smile returned, but this time it was softer, almost as if he knew exactly what he'd just done. The room, still quiet, seemed to take a collective breath. Then, as if flipping a switch, he moved on to the next question. But the damage, or perhaps the magic, was already done. That one answer had shifted the entire tone of the press conference. In the hours that followed, political commentators, social media users, and everyday citizens would dissect it endlessly. Supporters would call it proof of his sincerity. Critics would argue it was a calculated move to appear more relatable. But in that press room, for those few moments, it didn't matter which side of the political spectrum you were on. Everyone knew they had just witnessed something different, something worth remembering. The young reporter sat down, her heartbeat still slightly elevated. She didn't know if his answer was entirely honest, but she knew one thing for sure. She had asked the question no one else dared to, and she had gotten an answer that would echo far beyond those four walls. Within minutes of the press conference ending, the clip was everywhere. Editors didn't even need to trim it much, just a few seconds before the question and a few seconds after Trump's answer. It was short, powerful, and easy to share. And people did share it. It began on Twitter, where political accounts and journalists posted it with captions ranging from neutral summaries to emotionally charged reactions. Some framed it as a rare moment of transparency. Others called it political theater. But what really made it take off wasn't just the words, it was everything else. The pause before the answer, the way his tone shifted, the faint, almost imperceptible vulnerability in his voice. It was the kind of subtlety that, when captured on video, could be replayed and analyzed endlessly. And that's exactly what people started doing. On Twitter, the debates lit up like wildfire. Was this the real Trump showing for once? Calculated. 100% of performance. If you don't think this was genuine, you're missing the point. Hashtags trended within the hour. Hashtag Trump press moment. Hashtag fair question. And hashtag the pause. Political commentators jumped in, some uploading side-by-side comparisons of this moment, with his more combative exchanges in the past. Others slowed the video down, pointing out micro-expressions in his face as if they were analyzing sports footage. On YouTube, the clip became unstoppable. A single upload from a major news channel hit 2 million views in less than 6 hours. Independent political channels uploaded their own versions with commentary, analysis, or simply the raw footage with dramatic titles like "Trump stunned by reporter's question. Watch his reaction. The moment that silenced the room. You've never seen him like this before." The comment sections filled quickly. "I've never seen him answer like this." This is why live press conferences matter. The reporter deserves an award for asking that. It's moments like this that show why journalists are important. By midnight, some uploads had hundreds of thousands of likes. On Facebook, the clip took a different form, shorter edits designed for scrolling feeds. Pages shared it with captions like, "Watch what happens when a reporter asks Trump the one question no one dared to." These posts spread rapidly, often being shared in political groups, family chats, and local community pages. Older audiences who didn't live on Twitter were still seeing it on their timelines, often with long comment threads arguing over whether the moment was genuine or staged. On TikTok, the moment became part of trend. Creators stitched the clip, reacting to it in real time. Some did political breakdowns, others played it for shock value, and a few even turned the pause into a meme, overlaying dramatic music, slow-motion zoom-ins, or humorous captions. A particularly popular TikTok edit simply froze on Trump's half-smile during the pause with a caption, "When you weren't ready for that question." It got millions of views in under 24 hours. By the next morning, the clip was unavoidable. It was on the front page of YouTube's trending section. It was replaying on breakfast TV shows. It was the lead segment on political podcasts. Even late-night talk show hosts couldn't resist. One joked, "For 5 whole seconds, America thought we saw a new side of Donald Trump." Then Twitter reminded us, "Nope, that was probably just the Wi-Fi buffering." The young reporter who had asked the question woke up to a phone overflowing with notifications. Friends, colleagues, and even strangers were messaging her. "You're all over the internet. This is huge. Do you realize what you just did?" Her face was suddenly on news thumbnails across the web, often frozen mid-question. She hadn't done any interviews yet, partly because she wanted the moment to speak for itself, partly because she was still processing it. Her editors were thrilled. "We've never had this kind of engagement," one told her. "You just gave us the story of the year." Meanwhile, political strategists were dissecting the moment from every angle. Some argued Trump's softer tone was a deliberate tactic to humanize himself in the middle of a tense election cycle. Others insisted it was a rare, unplanned response that revealed genuine emotion. Conspiracy theories, of course, also emerged. Some claimed the question was planned to make him look good. Others claimed it was part of a deeper media strategy to shift the narrative for the week. Regardless of what anyone believed, the numbers didn't lie. The internet couldn't stop watching it. By noon that day, the clip had racked up over 20 million combined views across all platforms. And it wasn't slowing down. It had become more than just a moment in a press room. It had become a cultural snapshot. A reminder that in the age of instant media, sometimes a few words, a pause, and a change in tone can travel farther than an entire speech. And for the reporter, it was proof that asking the hard question, no matter the risk, could still change the conversation. Trump supporters wasted no time claiming victory. Within hours, conservative commentators flooded social media with praise. They called it proof of his composure, his leadership, and his unwavering commitment to the country. This is what a real president looks like, calm under pressure. He didn't dodge. He didn't attack. He answered like a leader. Some said the moment showed Trump could face hard questions without losing control, a side they believe the media rarely showed. In their view, it wasn't just a win, it was a masterclass in how to handle the press. But the critics were just as loud. For many who had spent years clashing with Trump's policies and public persona, the exchange was nothing more than a calculated performance. That was rehearsed. You could see it in the pause. It's classic stagecraft. Pretend to be vulnerable to win sympathy. Don't fall for it. He's done this before. Political rivals argued the shift in tone was strategic, especially coming during a tense political season. They claimed it was designed to soften his image just enough to sway undecided voters watching from home. And then there was the reporter. She could have been on every morning show in America. Producers called. Podcasts reached out. Even late-night talk show bookers wanted her on their couch. But she said no to every single one. Her friends later revealed why. She didn't want the spotlight to shift. It's not about me, she told them. It's about the question and the answer. The moment loses its meaning if I make it about my career. To her colleagues, that restraint was almost unheard of in today's media climate. Some praised her integrity. Others thought she was missing a once-in-a-lifetime chance. But for her, it was simple. She'd asked the question she wanted to ask. That was enough. Meanwhile, the analysts went to work. If you turn on the news in the next 48 hours, you couldn't escape it. Cable panels replayed the clip dozens of times. Each network slowing down different moments, as if they were reviewing game-winning plays from the Super Bowl. Body language experts pointed to the subtle narrowing of Trump's eyes before he spoke. Speech analysts dissected the rhythm of his words and how his voice dipped slightly in the middle of the sentence. Political strategists argued about whether the pause was a moment of genuine reflection or a perfectly timed silence designed to build suspense. One segment compared it to a championship boxing match. On one side, the reporter was the challenger, coming in with a surprise punch that landed squarely. On the other side, Trump, the seasoned champion, known for his aggressive counterattacks, chose an unexpected defensive move. Instead of throwing a verbal knockout, he stepped back, measured his response, and landed a softer, more strategic blow. Just like in sports, the replays kept coming. Slow motion, close-ups, even split screens comparing this response to his more combative moments with reporters in the past. The contrast was striking, and it fueled the debate even further. Social media wasn't slowing down either. Clips were now appearing with subtitles in multiple languages. International news outlets picked it up, running headlines like, "A different Trump appears in press exchange," and reporters' question stuns U.S. president. In Europe, commentators discussed it as a case study in political communication. In Asia, it was framed as an example of how leaders can control narratives with small shifts in tone. Even in countries where Trump wasn't a major political figure, the moment fascinated people simply because it was so out of character compared to his public image. But the most telling reaction came from ordinary viewers. Call-in radio shows and online forums were filled with people saying they had rewatched the clip multiple times, not because of the politics, but because it felt different from the usual chaos of press conferences. One caller on a popular talk radio program summed it up. "I'm not a Trump fan, but I'll be honest, he surprised me there. And I think that's why everyone's talking about it." Another caller disagreed completely. "It's all theater. But hey, it's good theater." By the third day, the story had shifted. It wasn't just about what Trump said or what the reporter asked. It was about how moments like this could ripple through the media landscape. Political scholars began writing opinion pieces on the power of tone, timing, and restraint in public speaking. The clip had transformed from a news event into a cultural artifact. It was no longer just about politics. It was about performance, perception, and the strange way a few seconds of human pause could dominate an entire news cycle. And through it all, the reporter stayed silent, watching from the sidelines as her question became one of the most analyzed moments of the year. For her, it was proof that sometimes a single bold sentence can echo far louder than hours of speeches. For Trump, it was another headline in a career full of them, but one that stood apart precisely because it was different. And for the rest of the world, it was a reminder, in politics as in life, the moments you least expect are often the ones that define the story. What the public didn't see was the quiet tension in the hours before the press conference. Behind the closed doors of a side room at the venue, Donald Trump's inner circle huddled together, shuffling through briefing papers and debating potential flashpoints. It wasn't the first time they'd braced for sharp questions from the media, but this time, the stakes fell higher. The political climate was electric, the headlines more aggressive, and rumors had already swirled that certain reporters planned to throw verbal grenades. One senior advisor leaned toward Trump and spoke plainly. "You're going to get tough questions today. Someone will try to get you off balance." Another, younger aide added something unusual for the Trump playbook. "If someone catches you off guard, take a breath. Don't fire back instantly. Just pause." It was a simple piece of advice, but for a man known for his rapid-fire comebacks, it was a radical suggestion. Trump listened, said nothing, and flipped through his notes. Whether he truly intended to follow that advice, no one knew. The moment arrives. Hours later, under the harsh lights of the press room, the scene unfolded. The question came from a reporter who wasn't a household name. Direct, unflinching, and potentially explosive. "Do you believe your actions have ever put the American people in danger?" The room froze. Every camera zoomed in. Every microphone leaned forward. Trump's eyes narrowed. Then that pause. The one that would be dissected endlessly. The mystery of the pause. From the outside, it looked like a moment of deep thought, or maybe hesitation. But for those who had been in the prep meeting, it looked exactly like what the aide had suggested earlier. Take a breath, hold back, let the room wait. He didn't do what so many expected. No immediate jab. No mocking nickname for the reporter. No turning the question back on her. Instead, he leaned forward and gave an answer that was unexpectedly measured, even reflective. Heartfelt or calculated. That's where the real debate began. Was this Trump speaking from a genuine place of reflection? Or was it the execution of a strategy planned just hours before? His supporters argued that it was the former, proof that, despite his public image, he could step back and address a tough question with seriousness. His critics were sure it was the latter, a premeditated act to project a softer, more presidential side without conceding anything of substance. The truth? Only Trump knew, for certain. The reporter's side of the story. In the days that followed, the reporter kept her silence publicly. She rejected interview requests and stayed off social media. But in a quiet conversation with a trusted colleague, she shared a surprising confession. She hadn't expected him to answer at all. In her mind, the likely scenario was that he'd brush her off with a sarcastic remark, pivot to another topic, or even scold her for asking. That would have been fine. She was ready for it. But instead, she got something far more potent, a pause that drew the whole room in, followed by words that seemed to pull back the curtain, if only slightly, on the man behind the podium. Why this moment hit hard? For seasoned political journalists, it's rare to see anything that feels unscripted in a press conference. These events are often meticulously choreographed, every word weighed, every answer rehearsed. But this felt different. Even if it was rehearsed, the delivery was so unlike his usual style that it stood out immediately. It wasn't just the content of the answer. It was the tone, the pacing, the fleeting vulnerability that people thought they saw. The ripple effect. By the time the press conference ended, the advisor's strategy, if that's what it was, had already worked its way into the public conversation. Commentators described the moment as oddly humanizing and out of character in a way that demands attention. The clip hit social media like wildfire. Hashtags trended. Memes sprouted. Edits of the pause set to dramatic music flooded TikTok. Political pundits dug deeper. This was no accident, one claimed. That pause was the entire message. If it was calculated, another countered, it's one of the smartest moves he's made. The moment becomes history. For the reporter, it became a career-defining moment, even if she refused to capitalize on it. For Trump, it was another unpredictable twist in a political career full of them. And for the public, it was a rare intersection of preparation and spontaneity, a moment where the behind-the-scenes whispers and the live broadcast collided in a way no one could ignore. Whether it was heartfelt or strategic didn't really matter anymore. What mattered was that it happened and that millions of people couldn't stop talking about it. Days after the press conference, the clip still had a grip on the internet. It wasn't just trending, it was everywhere. Late-night comedy shows replayed it with exaggerated pauses, adding laugh tracks and comedic captions. One host leaned in toward the camera and whispered, "Did we just see a human moment?" From Trump, the audience roared. Podcasts devoted entire episodes to the event. Political commentators dissected every blink, every shift in tone, every millisecond of that pause. Some compared it to a dramatic scene in a movie, where the hero hesitates just long enough to make you wonder if the next line will change everything. YouTube political analysts, always hungry for content, slowed the video down frame by frame, zooming in on Trump's eyes, noting the slight narrowing before he spoke, the almost imperceptible lean forward. Titles like Trump's Pause, Strategy, or Slip pulled in millions of curious viewers. Two very different interpretations. From the discussions, two camps emerged. The first camp called it Trump's most human moment. They argued that the pause and the softer tone were proof that even a man known for his bombast could stop, think, and respond with sincerity. To them, it was a rare and refreshing break from the combative energy that often dominated his interactions with the press. The second camp dismissed it entirely. To them, this was nothing more than a well-timed performance, a pre-planned move designed to look vulnerable while actually being highly controlled. "Don't be fooled," one critic warned. This was theater. Nothing more, nothing less. And yet, even those critics had to admit it was effective theater. A reminder of the unscripted. No matter which side people took, one thing was undeniable. The moment was a reminder that even the most powerful figures in the world can be caught off guard. And when they are, the public watches with laser focus. It wasn't the question itself that made history. It was the unexpected reaction, something outside the predictable script, that made people stop scrolling and pay attention. The reporters knew reality. While the internet debated Trump's motives, the reporter at the center of it all was experiencing her own wave of attention. She'd entered that press conference as one of dozens of journalists, known only within certain professional circles. But now, her inbox was full of interview requests, invitations to appear on talk shows, and offers to collaborate with media outlets she had once dreamed of joining. She politely declined most of them. In conversations with friends, she explained, "I don't want this to be about me. The focus should be on the question and the answer, not the person who asked it." Still, the industry noticed. Invitations to high-profile press events began arriving. Organizers wanted that reporter, the one who had dared to ask the question no one else had. She had become a symbol of journalistic courage, the embodiment of ask-it-anyway journalism. Trump returns to form. Meanwhile, Donald Trump, never one to linger too long on one tone, quickly returned to his trademark fiery style. At the next press conference, he was back to rapid comebacks, quick jabs, and playful, or biting, nicknames for reporters. It was almost as if the viral moment had been an isolated glitch in an otherwise steady broadcast, a brief change in the programming before everything snapped back to normal. Still, that single deviation had been enough to shift the conversation. People had seen something different, and once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. A cultural moment. The clip became more than just political content. It became a cultural artifact. People used it in unrelated memes, edited it into reaction videos, and even quoted it in unrelated contexts. College communications classes broke it down as an example of nonverbal messaging. Media studies programs cited it as proof of how one pause could dominate a news cycle. For weeks, it seemed like you couldn't scroll through a political feed without encountering that moment. The bigger lesson: Beyond the headlines, beyond the debates over sincerity versus performance, the viral exchange highlighted something larger: the hunger for authenticity, or at least the appearance of it, in politics. Audiences are used to rehearse speeches and talking points. But when something breaks that pattern, it feels electric. Whether that electricity comes from honesty or calculated theater almost doesn't matter in the instant it happens. People are drawn to it. And then life goes on. Eventually, the online buzz slowed. Other political stories emerged. Other viral clips took over, and the moment faded from the front page. But didn't disappear. Like a bookmark in political history, it remained in the archives, ready to be referenced, replayed, or rediscovered whenever the topic of Trump's unpredictability arose. For the reporter, it marked the start of a new chapter in her career. For Trump, it was another unpredictable twist in a career defined by them. And for the public, it was proof that sometimes the moments you remember most are the ones you least expect. Because in the world of politics, and especially in front of the cameras, the real headline is often the one nobody planned.